Hello everyone! Welcome to Untold History, the place where we explore the most important and fascinating episodes in world history. Today we embark on a journey to the early 20th century to talk about one of the most emblematic revolutionary movements in Latin America, the Mexican Revolution. This conflict, which began in 1910, not only transformed Mexico but also marked a shift in the continent's politics and society, inspiring generations of social justice fighters. To understand this event, we must go back to the period of the dictatorship of Porfirio Diaz, a regime that dominated Mexico for more than 30 years, from 1876 to 1911. The Porfiriato was characterized by rapid economic development and significant modernization in infrastructure, such as the expansion of railway lines and the opening of new industries. However, this progress had a very high social cost. Modernization was achieved at the expense of the vast majority of Mexicans, who endured growing inequality. Large landowners, together with foreign businessmen, controlled most of the country's land and resources, while peasants lived in conditions of extreme poverty and labor exploitation. This government maintained a policy of intense political repression to stifle any kind of dissent. Elections were a mere formality, and Diaz made sure to remain in power through fraud and political manipulation. Political opposition was practically nullified, and any attempt at protest or social grievance was quickly silenced by the army or the police. This situation created a breeding ground for social discontent, especially among the working class and peasants, who saw how the country's wealth benefited only a privileged elite. In 1910, tension came to a head when Francisco Madero, a wealthy landowner with democratic ideals, decided to openly challenge Porfirio Diaz. Madero, influenced by liberal and progressive ideas, had written a book entitled The Presidential Succession in 1910, in which he criticized Diaz's perpetuation in power and advocated free and democratic elections. When Diaz, who had promised not to run for another term, decided to run again, Madero launched a call for rebellion. On November 20, 1910, Madero launched the Plan of San Luis, a revolutionary manifesto that marked the beginning of the revolution. This document not only called for armed struggle against the Diaz regime, but also promised a series of social and political reforms, including the redistribution of land to peasants. Call to arms attracted a broad spectrum of leaders and factions, each with their own agendas and motivations. Among them were figures such as Emiliano Zapata in the south, who fought for a profound agrarian reform under the slogan Land and Freedom, and Pancho in the north, a charismatic caudillo who advocated for social justice and became a symbol of the power of the people. The uprising of Madero and his followers managed to destabilize the Diaz regime, forcing his resignation in 1911 and his exile in France. However, his fall did not mean the end of the revolution. In fact, it was only the beginning of a decade of intense civil war. What followed was a period of violence and instability in which different revolutionary factions fought for control of the country. Madero assumed the presidency, but his term was brief and marked by treachery and conflict. In 1913, Madero was overthrown and assassinated in a coup d'état led by General Victoriano Huerta, who declared himself dictator. Madero's assassination outraged many of the revolutionary factions that had fought against Diaz, including Zapata and Villa. Both leaders rejected Huerta's government and continued their struggle. Villa, with his northern army known as the Northern Division, and Zapata, with his Southern Liberation Army, launched military offensives against Huerta's regime. These armies not only fought Huerta's federal forces, but also confronted the interests of the landowners and the United States, which viewed with concern the growing instability in Mexico. Conflict was particularly violent in regions such as Morelos, where Zapata led a tireless struggle for land and the right of peasants to work it. His agrarian movement, based on the return of land to indigenous and peasant communities, represented a direct threat to the landowning elites. Zapata's slogan, Land and Freedom, encapsulated the demands of millions of oppressed Mexicans for decades and became one of the most powerful rallying cries of the revolution. Meanwhile, in the north, Villa carried out daring military campaigns, earning a reputation as a popular hero and enemy of the elites. Villa was not only an able military leader, but also a symbol of the resistance of the marginalized. His victories in key battles, such as the capture of Ciudad Juarez, cemented his position as one of the most important leaders of the Mexican Revolution. However, the alliance between Villa and Zapata was fragile, and both leaders had different visions about Mexico's future. As the revolution progressed, the figure of Venustiano Carranza emerged as the leader of a constitutionalist faction that sought to restore institutional order in the country. Carranza, supported by the Constitutionalist Army and with the intention of creating a government based on laws and not on caudillos, promulgated a new constitution in 1917, which is still in force today. This constitution included social and political reforms ahead of its time, such as land redistribution, labor rights, separation of church and state, and nationalization of natural resources. Constitution of 1917 was a revolutionary document that laid the foundation for modern Mexico, but it was also a point of controversy and division. Although it enshrined rights that would be fundamental for the development of the country, its implementation was uneven and many of the promises of the revolution were left unfulfilled. In addition, internal divisions and personal ambitions continued to fuel the violence. Zapata was assassinated in 1919, betrayed in an ambush, which marked the end of one of the most emblematic figures of the revolution. Villa, although he continued to fight, was defeated and retired from public life, being assassinated in 1923. Carranza, although victorious, also fell victim to betrayal and was assassinated in 1920. His successor, Álvaro Obregón, assumed power and established a period of relative stability. Obregón, a pragmatic leader, implemented some of the reforms promised by the revolution but also consolidated his power in an authoritarian manner, leading to new tensions and conflicts in the years that followed. Despite these difficulties, this event left a deep legacy in the culture and politics of Mexico. The Mexican Revolution is seen today as an event that, although it did not solve all of the country's problems, laid the foundations for a modern Mexico and transformed the social landscape. The ideals of social justice, agrarian reform, and labor rights continued to inspire movements throughout Latin America throughout the 20th century. Thank you for joining us on this journey through one of the most important moments in the history of Mexico. We hope this episode has given you a new perspective on the complexities of this conflict and its lasting legacy. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and activate the bell so you don't miss any future episodes. Thank you for your support and for being part of this community. See you in the next episode of Untold Story.